So I want to introduce to the stage Lisa Bureau. She leads our Cleary branch. Paul Moore, the Deputy General Counsel and Chief Investigative Counsel, and Kevin Sloop, who is a Senior Counsel. They are going to be talking to us about foreign gifts and contract reporting, what it requires, and why it matters. Please give them a round of applause.
Thanks very much. It's nice to be here and appreciate everyone showing up on a Friday morning. So we'll try to make this an exciting and worthwhile presentation for you. My colleagues have been at this for a long time with the department, from one administration to the next. I've bounced around a little bit, but it's a privilege to get to work with them. I understand you've heard from Secretary McMahon, Undersecretary and Acting Deputy Secretary Nicholas Kent, and Acting Chief Operating Officer Richard Lucas, so you've already heard quite a bit of use from the department on these things. But I want to, I know that you all may have varying levels of familiarity with what we're talking about, which we just shorthand as Section 117. It's 20 U.S.C. 111F1, and you can, I think it probably is in the handouts that you've got. And just a little background about that. It became law in 1986. It's been amended since then, but it became law in 1986. It's a fairly simple requirement. The great thing about Section 117 is you don't need to hire an expensive attorney to interpret it. It's pretty simple. It requires that universities and colleges which receive federal funding must biannually report foreign gifts and contracts, the aggregate value of which from a single source is $250,000 or more in a year, in a calendar year. So pretty simple. Having said that, there wasn't a lot of focus on it until in 2019, January of 2019, the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations issued a bipartisan staff report finding that the vast majority of institutions were failing to report qualifying foreign funding. They actually called it a black hole of foreign financial support and influence at institutions of higher education. It's a big problem. That got the department's interest and compelled a need to act in this area. So in 2019 and 20, the department began highlighting this issue. It then, in the next 2 years, launched 19 civil investigations to determine apparent levels of noncompliance. One of the things that we did at the time is manually reviewed 990Fs, IRS form. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that. And going through those and comparing them to what had been reported to the Department of Education, it was very clear that there were indeed major gaps, a big black hole with institutions failing to report substantial amounts of qualifying foreign gifts and contracts. So we then also, to facilitate compliance, we created a new reporting portal. Actually, Kevin Sloop led that effort in June of 2020. It was a very basic reporting portal, but it led to more than $6.5 billion in more or less catch-up reporting by universities, and we appreciated that very much. We then issued a report on that in October of 2020, the compliance failures, the catch-up efforts by universities, and trying to spell out the challenges for the sake of universities. I would urge you to look at the February 2019 report that I mentioned from the Bipartisan Staff Committee. It will help you understand the department's concern. That report's entitled China's Impact on the U.S. Education System. Even more so, I would urge you to look at the department's October 2020 report. It's entitled Institutional Compliance with Section 117 of the Higher Education Act of 1965. You can actually find that at the Knowledge Center, FSA's Knowledge Center. It's one of the resources there, but I encourage you to take a look at that. You'll understand in 36 pages the department's concern with this issue. And from time to time, there's been some sense that the department was picking on universities. That's not the point of it. What we want is to have full compliance with this fairly simple requirement. The department's agnostic about who universities are receiving money from, but it is important that it be timely and accurately reported. That continues to be a big challenge, which I'll talk more about that. Just to let you know, another thing I would highlight with our report from October 2020, its findings included that it was more or less the norm that the, quote, largest, wealthiest, and most sophisticated institutions of higher education were the ones that were failing to accurately and timely report qualifying foreign gifts and contracts. So that's a big concern. One of the protestations at the time from some universities was that it's too complicated to track these things and report them to the department. Our investigation showed otherwise. We required substantial records from the universities as part of our enforcement efforts in 2019 and 2020. And those records made very clear that the universities tracked to the penny money coming from domestically, internationally, things like that. So there was a need for the universities to get serious in their compliance efforts and maybe to cross boundaries within the university to ensure that compliance with 117 was occurring and that all appropriate components within the university were sharing their information. So that continues to be a big goal. Just to let you know the latest this morning on our new reporting portal, this is hot off the press, we've updated the Section 117 reports provided by your universities. It shows that in the last reporting period, which ended on January 31st of this year, nearly $5 billion in additional foreign gifts and contracts were reported for that period. That included 10,656 submissions, individual submissions. Those submissions, by the way, included dozens of transactions worth millions with counterparties. Counterparty, of course, is just the other party to a transaction. Involved counterparties which appear on various U.S. government restricted lists. I encourage you to go to the website, foreignfundinghighered.gov. You can see the different U.S. government restricted lists. There are 9 of them that are listed. They include lists of restricted entities where the U.S. government over time, not a political thing, over time with careful consideration over many administrations, has created these lists urging universities, anyone else, to exercise a great deal of care when interacting with these, having transactions, in this case, with those entities that appear on those lists. So it's important that you look at those lists. They include Department of War, Department of Commerce, Department of Treasury, Department of State, Department of Justice, and some other lists. So I encourage you to take a look at those things. I'll be discussing the new reporting portal after Lisa's presentation. It went live on January 2nd, but we did try to make it much easier for universities to report. So again, we're not trying to create a trap for universities with compliance. To the contrary, we want full compliance. We want to make it easy. To do that, we actually included in our beta testing group, before that went live, we included 9 universities, 3 of which universities were universities that we had investigated in 2019 and 20. So we weren't just looking for universities that might be complementary. We said, we want to hear what you really think. Tell us how we can make this easy for you. And so we believe we've created a system to do that. So we really want to encourage compliance, and we also think that that's a reason why the most recent report is so substantial. It may be a record. If not, it's the second highest ever we believe, in a single reporting period made to the Department of Justice, aggregate numbers. The current state of the law, again, the law is very simple, and we offer guidance at FSA's Knowledge Center and also answers to frequently asked questions. We also provide a route for you to ask questions, and we will, while we're not in the business of providing advisory opinions to you, we try to answer questions that are very common and to do it in a very timely way. So don't hesitate to use that resource, and we'll get back to you as quickly as possible. There are 2 new developments that I would like to highlight for you. Section 117, if you read it, requires that the department make available for public inspection the reports submitted by the universities. Excuse me. That's something that's been wanting for several years. It's been there have been great limitations on what the department has made available, publicly available. Part of that probably had to do with the fact that there were so few submissions for so many decades. But now that we have a new reporting portal and system that allows us to organize these things, it makes it a lot easier to make them available for public inspection. So we're doing that. On February 11th, we launched the public inspection phase of the new reporting portal. And again, I encourage you to look at that, foreignfundinghighered.gov. And you can review the latest records, which again were refreshed this morning with an extra almost $5 billion reported by universities. I would urge you, because this is very pertinent to financial aid and your participation in PPAs and your obligations under PPAs. There are counterparties that are listed from countries of concern, And again, I was mentioning the various restricted U.S. government lists. There are a lot of counterparties, hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions reported with counterparties of particular concern. Who are the counterparties? This goes to due diligence by the universities. It's up to you, but you can conduct open source checks on the involvements of your counterparties. We really encourage you to do this. Are they bad actors? Are they curious actors? Is it worth the potential reputational harm to your university to be accepting money from some of these actors or to have contractual obligations to them, with them? These are things that your university should be asking. Part of our effort, there's a new, I should have said this, sorry about that, on April 23rd of last year, Executive Order 14282 was issued. And that requires that the department engage in efforts to create more protections for the research, taxpayer-funded research that's developed at our universities, and also does a better job at making transparent foreign financial involvement with our universities. So as part of that effort, we're engaged in new interagency efforts, cooperating with other agencies. This isn't new, it's something that we've done historically over the decades. In the past, it's been less secure, less efficient. We're making it with the new reporting portal system, we're going to make it more secure, more efficient. And so we've embarked on efforts to coordinate with other agencies, information sharing, access to our 117 records. So that means, for practical purposes, if you have an NSF grant or award, or name the agency, and you have a principal investigator who's submitted incomplete, let's say, or inaccurate information, that agency will be able to check the information submitted in support of that grant application or award application against Section 117 records to make sure that what's been presented to that agency in support of the award application is truthful. So again, I encourage you, as this is a serious matter, take a look at who your principal investigators are working with. They may be wonderful scientists, but they may actually have collaborations that they're required to engage in with some shady characters around the world. And that's a concern, and it may weigh on not on the Department of Education's decisions, but on that agency's decisions about awards for your principal investigators and for your universities. So again, most of this information is available open source, and with just a little effort, you can find a lot of information about who are the collaboration partners for your principal investigators. So when the money's coming in, that's great, but take a look at who else is involved. Very important to do. There are some of the, it's apparent from some of the records submitted to the department that there are prominent universities in this country that receive substantial amounts of taxpayer funding, especially for R&D, who have as counterparties foreign entities that are involved in developing the technology used to suppress the Uyghurs. So if your university stands for human rights, you may want to consider who your counterparties are. In our most recent reports submitted to the department, it's very clear that more than one university, including some very prominent universities, have foreign financial transactions that were reportable with counterparties in China who are aiding in the development of weapons technology in Iran. And of course, we're involved in a hot conflict with Iran right now. So these are things that we suggest you look at. Again, you can, through some due diligence that your university decides is appropriate, you can see who the collaborators are that your counterparties may be interacting with. And we urge you to do that and at least make the effort. And I want to say the Department of Education has never acted punitively against a university acting in good faith. And so engaging in these efforts certainly shows the good faith of your university. And so we urge you to consider that and to act accordingly. So in other words, be diligent and consider the better organization at the department and our efforts with other agencies because that will better inform our efforts and those agencies' efforts. So drill down on your university's involvements and collaborations. As I mentioned, the department, and this gets into our enforcement capabilities, the department will begin referring noncompliance for the full recovery of enforcement costs to the Department of Justice. That's not something we've done before. There was substantial noncompliance, big time, one major university that everyone would know, went for 4 years without reporting hundreds of millions of qualifying disclosures to the department. That and other universities were never punished for that. We did make public our investigations, but that was the extent of the harm to those universities or the punishment that they may have suffered. Going forward, that may change because we intend to go with where there's been a lack of good faith by universities or a lack of appropriate due diligence. We intend to seek the full cost of enforcement through the Department of Justice. So we hope not to have to do that, but we urge you to act diligently and in good faith so we don't have to go there. The other thing, too, is, and you can see our notice of interpretation on November 13th, 2020, with program participation agreements, you must be in compliance with Section 117. You must be reporting in a timely and accurate way the information that's required by 117. Failure is a violation of your PPA obligations, and that could result in suspension, debarment, termination, or a fine. Or all of the above. And we don't want that to happen. We're very proud of our universities, and our goal is to simply provide the transparency that the American people deserve and that the law requires. And we urge you to keep that in mind. The American people send a lot of money to our universities, and they have a right to know the foreign funding that's coming in a timely way. So we really encourage your efforts, and we're here to help facilitate that. I'll now move over to Lisa, a longtime colleague and a great asset for you and for the department.
So I'm going to talk a little bit. Good morning, first of all. Let me add my thanks to Paul's for you all being here still. I know from 30-plus years attending conferences as a practicing Title IV lawyer that by today your head is filled with a ton of information. You have a million new questions running around your head, including, is my institution doing that right or wrong? You've bounced a number of ideas off your colleagues. And at this juncture, you may be both energized and wiped out. So we appreciate the fact that you're still here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the kind of meat and potatoes, if you will, of Section 117. I want to reiterate that Section 117, again, is important to your institution's participation. It may not be in your particular work streams, except with respect to the new portal technology, which Paul is going to talk about. Some of you, if you're the primary administrator at your institution, you may have come across it in this reporting cycle. But ultimately, it remains important, even though it isn't necessarily related to, the awarding and dispersing of funds to your students. So I'm going to move through agenda items 4 through 9. We'll be talking about some of your core responsibilities, compliance expectations that shape the way you manage, track, and report your foreign gifts and contracts. There's a bit of detail on these slides. I may not cover every issue or every word. Please feel free when this gets published to share it with the people at your institution that actually have this role. As I said, a lot of times it's not the financial aid department, but as we all know, there are a lot of things that you're responsible for under your PPA that aren't necessary in your day-to-day operational obligations. Let's reiterate the fundamental law because it's really hard to say it. As it relates to reporting gifts and contracts. Whenever any institution receives a gift from or enters into a contract with a foreign source, the value of which is $250,000 or more, considered alone or in combination with all other gifts from and contracts with that same foreign source within a calendar year. So there's a lot of concepts here. The institution is required to file a disclosure report with the department, and those deadlines are January 31st and July 31st. Those are statutory deadlines, whichever is sooner. The foundational concept of the law is gifts from and contracts with foreign sources. And your institution's obligations are dependent on the definition of a foreign source. So there are 4 categories in Section 117 of foreign sources. One is the foreign government and its agencies, right? So, it may be like the United States government, but a foreign source. Or it may be that country's Department of Education, whatever they call it, may be a ministry, it may be a lot of different things, but that's covered. Legal entities, government or otherwise, created under the laws of a foreign state. So as you can see, especially in those first two categories, you can have some overlap, and when you get into the portal, you may find that you are answering yes to more than one of these categories. Then with respect to individuals, non-citizens, or people who are not nationals of the United States, trust territory, or a protectorate of the United States. So pretty, that one's a little bit simple. And then agents, including any subsidiary or affiliate of a foreign legal entity acting on behalf of a foreign source. So understanding kind of the categories is essential. You also have to figure out which country you're attributing the gift to, right? So with respect to individuals, the country depends on in the first instance on the citizenship of the person, or if known, their principal residence, right? With respect to a legal entity, it depends on where they're incorporated, or if unknown, their principal place of business. The analysis of foreign source determines whether a transaction even enters kind of your pipeline or your institution's pipeline for determining whether it's reportable. And that takes, they're taking in all this information from, all the aspects of your institution and trying to figure out on an aggregate basis, do they have something that has to be reported? And once you hit the reporting thresholds, all the transactions that meet that threshold, aggregated, have to be reported individually. So how does an institution do this? The bottom line is your institution has to apply a reasonable due diligence standard in trying to determine whether a gift or a contract involves a foreign source. That can include a lot of different things. Maybe you're obtaining, as Paul talked about, open source information. Maybe you're asking the counterparty directly. You're conducting independent research. You're reviewing public records. Due diligence, as a concept, isn't a one-size-fits-all parameter. It's, in the circumstances, what is the appropriate level of diligence to try to determine whether it's a foreign source. So, we would, for example, expect more diligence in a situation where you've got, a new relationship, a unique relationship, a relationship maybe that's a large volume in terms of dollars, for entities that you deal with constantly. Maybe your school gets, grants for students from a particular ministry, and you've done that over time, so it may be familiar and well-established, and you may have to do less diligence on that particular entity. There are a couple of unique situations I wanted to call out because these are often subject to questions in our email addresses. We have two email addresses that you can request information through. One's foreign gifts access at ed.gov, and we'll talk about them again. And that is for if you have an access issue. If you have a question of interpretation, as Paul said, we're not really giving opinions or advisory opinions out, but if we can help you with something that's, a regular question, you can reach out to foreign source reporting at ed.gov. So a couple of these unique situations. Reporting a gift or a contract with a multinational corporation or a U.S. entity with a foreign parent. This is reportable if the counterparty is acting as an agent of a foreign source. In this case, we would expect your diligence to evaluate the degree to which the foreign parent is exercising control, to consider the formal relationship between the parties that's established in the gift or contract documents, and the practical realities of how the entities interact. For example, and the direction and supervision of management. So for example, if you're finding, you're dealing with a U.S. sub, but they are copying in every instance someone from a parent from a foreign country, you're going to want to investigate that, right, and figure out who's really in control. The key here is figuring out Is there a foreign source involved, and making those relationships transparent? So the second unique circumstance that generates a lot of questions is gifts from or contracts with a foreign subsidiary of a U.S. corporation. I think there's a tendency to think that if it's related to a U.S. corporation in any way, that it couldn't possibly be a foreign source gift or contract. And again, you're going to look at the same issues. You know, what's the control level? What's the actual relationship? What do the documents say? Just as an additional practice note, and an important part of this is, do you have to disclose the identity of the foreign source? This is a constant question. It's an ongoing question. We've made our position on this very, very clear. To the extent that your institution can reasonably obtain the foreign source's identity, that foreign source has to be identified. Typically, I mean, in the, you know, in normal operations, you know, you should know the contracting party, and it's probably unlikely that your institution is getting bags of money dropped off, right? So it is very likely that you know this. This requirement holds even if the institution or the foreign source requests anonymity, right? So think about it, you know, and we do have that situation. If an institution reports an anonymous foreign source, an anonymous donor, you know, we are likely to ask some questions about how are they anonymous? What due diligence did you do to figure out this foreign source? So it's really important to understand the specific terms of the contract or gift agreements, and it may involve asking counterparties directly for information. Now, this isn't, I understand this isn't necessarily you, but this is information that you have to take to the offices that do this work. All right, so first question is foreign source. Then we have to look at the transaction thresholds, which is a key determinant for when reporting is required. And, you know, gifts and contracts have different thresholds in terms of when they're counted, right? And that's important for the purposes of your aggregation of the amounts during the calendar year. There are a lot of instances where a transaction value is clear and it's easily defined, right? Very simple. You know, we got a gift of $250,000 from X Ministry of Education. There are a lot of transactions, however, that aren't clear. For example, you have a contract of indeterminate value, right? There's a contract that says you're going to do this thing, and there's some kind of methodology for determining over time what your institution is going to take in under that contract. You have to apply a reasonable methodology, a valuation methodology, at the time the contract is executed. Contracts are reportable have to be considered at the time they are executed. It's very clear in the statute. We have a lot of questions constantly coming in. You know, we found out we had this contract. We didn't report it, you know, 2 years ago. However, you know, even though it said this much money under the contract, they never actually paid us. So do we have to report it now? The answer is yes, right? Because you're determining it at the time the contract was entered into, and, you know, the failure to report it doesn't get justified by the fact that it didn't prove to be a lucrative contract for the institution, right? Similarly, there's a lot of questions around, you know, acquisitions, right? I'm going to acquire something, or someone's going to acquire something from me, and those have to be based on fair market value when you're determining the value, right? Because what we don't want is a situation where there's a, you know, a really sweet deal made as a method for the foreign source to get funding to your institution, right? By utilization of a contract for services or goods. So the key here is that your institutions are reporting transparently and consistently, and the intent is, the law isn't really that complicated. The intent is to make it easy to report. It's an easy law, right, if you look at it by its terms. It's just a question of making these interpretations and doing the diligence. Now, gift reporting is different than contract reporting. Gift reporting, you report at the time the gift is received, not based on a pledge. And I think this is recognition of the fact that, one, sometimes institutions get pledges from donors that don't materialize, right? So it's a different kind of timing obligation. So if your pledge is never fully realized, you report only those funds actually received, again, focusing on the calendar year and the aggregate amounts. It's important as you do that, and we talked about this a little bit, that a lot of small gifts can accumulate to meet the 250,000 threshold, right? I think there's, and when you get there, that requires you to disclose every discrete transaction. So if, you can't have a situation where a foreign source doesn't want to be known, so they just say, well, we'll give you, $250,001 transactions, right? That just doesn't work under the analysis. This approach ensures that institutions don't overlook significant foreign contributions simply because they occur across smaller increments, but also it protects the institution from having to report gifts that don't materialize. We're not trying to make this difficult. The law is not difficult, right? Contract reporting introduces some distinct considerations that are a little bit different from gift reporting. There's a wide range of contracts that your institution enters into. And determining, I think sometimes when institutions look at them, they think, well, this particular type of contract clearly isn't intended, right? This is a different kind of contract. This isn't a contract to just give us some money. This is, for example, a clinical trial contract, right, for drug tests. That's one that we get a lot of questions off. It's reportable. Money out purchases from foreign vendors, right? Generally not reportable, but the institution has to determine whether it's arm's length and fairly valued. Exceptionally low-cost purchases may constitute reportable transactions. Contract reporting extends to intellectual property agreements. It applies to subcontracts, provided they meet the thresholds. So those are kind of some of the areas where we have a lot of questions that people come in constantly and say, well, you couldn't mean this. The definition, if you look at the statute, the definition of a contract is pretty broad. It's basically, let me grab my statute so I actually read you the right words. Any agreement for the acquisition by purchase, lease, or barter of property or services by the foreign source for the direct benefit or use of either of the parties. So it's a pretty broad definition when your institution goes to look at it. We've recently, when we did the new portal has a little note for institutions when they enter their contracts. This contract looks like it's more than 6 months old, which would be, the entrance date, more than 6 months old, which probably should have already been reported, basically, right? This is just a note to the institution. With that note, we've realized that there are schools who have been reporting the same contract every reporting cycle, just to be, they're trying to be open and transparent and comply. And so we've had to tell some schools, no, it's a one-time thing unless you report a contract, you've made a good faith analysis of what the value is going to be. If you later determine that the actual value is materially different, and I think in the FAQ there's a 10% kind of threshold, right? Your institution has to update the disclosure through the portal, right? This prevents unnecessary duplicate reporting while maintaining accuracy, right? So here's your contracts may last 10 years, 20 years, whatever. Don't report it every time. You report it once at the time you enter into it, unless you determine that the amount you valued it at is significantly different, okay? And one of the things Paul's going to talk about is with the new technology we're very excited about this capacity. Under the old system, institutions couldn't correct their own reporting. He had to send us an email and request that things be withdrawn, and then you had to resubmit them. So now there's functionality that is really exciting for us, and I think it's going to make it significantly easier for institutions. The next issue, restricted or conditional gifts and contracts. These demand special attention by your institution. The statutory definition of these is specific and limited, but if the contract or gift at issue is restricted or conditional under our requirements, then the institution has additional disclosures that are required by the statute. So what is a restricted or conditional gift or contract? It's a gift or contract that includes provisions related to the employment, assignment, or termination of faculty, establishment of academic units, programs, faculty positions. For example, someone comes in and sets up a new chair in one of your departments. Admissions criteria, if it involves admissions criteria, or if it involves student financial aid that is limited by nationality, religion, sex, ethnicity, or political opinion, right? And you can have, some of these contracts and gifts, they may implicate all of these restricted conditions. So, okay, so you find out you've got a restricted or conditional contract or gift. You have to provide for those transactions a detailed description of the specific condition that triggers the Section 117 definition. We have had schools in the past, say, okay, yes, admissions criteria, and put that as their description. That's not what is necessary here. We need a fulsome description of the relationship and the transaction, right? It's not enough just to kind of parrot one of the criteria. You've got to give specific details in terms of that restricted gift or contract. So again, the complete concept here is transparency around foreign influence on academic and operational decisions. There are very few kind of reporting exceptions in terms of the transaction, right? You got to report the transaction. We do provide an ability to aggregate if you have a large group of tuition payment contracts for students from a specific country, and they are all the same. You guys have probably seen, student scholarship documents where, 20 students from the same country will have the exact same relationship. And in certain cases with those, you can aggregate that and report it. That's an exception from the per transaction reporting. So, who has to file? Under the law, any institution that meets the statutory definition of an institution under this law, which is bachelor's degree programs. If you have a program that's 2 years creditable toward a bachelor's degree, then obviously, and you participate in Title IV, you're going to have to file here. Also, there is a kind of a second provision that isn't involved with gift and contract reporting is if you have ownership in your ownership tree of a foreign source, right? That's required reporting. If you have foreign source ownership, you have to report that as long as it exists every time the 6-month reporting period comes up. And I will say this, that your reporting in Partner Connect, in your ownership chain, your eligibility applications, any of that, that does not cover your Section 117 reporting obligation, right? So if you have any questions about that, feel free to weigh in at foreign source reporting, but that's a slight nuance in this. There's often the question of, my institution has, and a lot of the bigger institutions have these, has a foundation, right? I don't control I'm the institution in this. I don't control them. I don't know where they're getting their money. I can't possibly be expected to know what's going on at the foundation. There is no separate obligation for a foundation of an institution to report. The reporting obligation is solely the institution's, right? So they have no independent obligation, but you If they operate for the benefit or under the auspices of the institution, then you have to evaluate whether they're getting money from foreign sources. This can be true of also alumni groups, booster organizations, right? Your due diligence has to be, where are they getting this money? And, we recognize that, sometimes the relationship is, the institution can't just demand information, but it's part of your legal obligation to try to figure that out. So you're obligated, bottom line, to apply a reasonable due diligence standard when you're looking at these transactions and determining whether they benefit your institution, regardless of the entity. So the key here, I think, the takeaway from what I've talked about, and I'm going to divert quickly to Paul because he's going to talk about the new portal. But the key here is the accurate identification of your foreign sources, rigorous valuation and aggregation of transactions, a clear understanding of when gifts and contracts become reportable. Very simple concept that a lot of institutions are still continuing to miss, right, when it's reportable. A commitment to transparency. So, again, thank you. I realize it's late. This isn't in your particular work streams, but I know that because of your PPA relationship that you are all responsible for a lot of things that aren't about the awarding and dispersing of aid. So, take the information back to the groups that deal with this, and Godspeed on the way home. Paul.
Thank you, Lisa. Just a few words about the reporting portal. And first of all, I just emphasize again what Lisa just said. If this isn't particularly in your line of responsibility, we do hope that you'll take it back to your university official area on the side of inclusion that may need to know about what we're saying here today. And we're happy to engage with them and make sure that they understand the requirements. We've since last April, we've engaged in many efforts to try to make sure that people are informed. For the new reporting portal, I think we put out maybe, was it 10 different electronic announcements, probably to your annoyance, but we want to make sure that everyone sees what we're doing and understands what we're trying to do. And we will consider it victory. The Secretary will, the Undersecretary will, if, and everyone else at the department, if there's full compliance, if we see continued improvement toward compliance, which is a big part of why we created the new reporting portal. I'll just point out that in the previous reporting period, January through July of 2025, more than $2 billion was reported in an untimely way. And again, try that with the IRS. It's, we're not the IRS, but it's really important that institutions take seriously the obligation to get the reports to us on time, making a good faith effort to do so, and not engaging in kind of ceaseless, endless withdrawals, resubmissions, things like that. So we ask that you make a real effort to try to do that. We one of the things that we did with the website, first of all, it tracks the statutory requirements. I realize it's always a suspicious thing when a government official says we have done something to try to help you, but in this case, we really, really have. If you follow the portal, and there are demonstrations of it that you can look at in your spare time at the Knowledge Center, FSA's Knowledge Center. There's a tutorial for it. But we literally track the statute, and we try to make sure that even if you're having a bad day or things are unclear, it sends you to the right point. It prompts you to check what you're about to send. It allows administrative officials at your universities to review before a submission is made so that they understand. It's like, they may say, we're reporting how much with who? And so it gives you a great opportunity internally to review that before submitting. And then again, the opportunity to easily amend your reports. We try to make that as easy as possible. We do track it, and so when you've amended a report, we see each time that that's been amended. So it's not that sort of goes away. But one other one other point, one of the data points, we've increased by 61% the amount of data points that are available for public inspection. We'll be increasing even more. But one of the data points is when your reports were submitted. In the past, that hasn't been included in what's provided for the public inspection. That's now part of what's provided for your reports from this point going forward. So again, be really careful. The public, Congress, the media, board people at home have every right to see if you're reporting in a timely way. So please be attuned to that. Again, Lisa's point about the value of a contract, for example. I think last year we had one very large university system that reported, I think, a $910 million difference in the valuation that they had assigned to a particular contract. And that's a whopper, that's a big one. But again, it was reported, and that's what matters. So report it, but also make a very good faith effort to report it accurately at the beginning, and let us know to the extent that you can that you've done that if we ask any questions. I think that's really it. I encourage you to go to foreignfundinghighered.gov. Thank you for your attention. Again, please share this information with other folks at your universities, and we'll be happy to engage with them as we seek full compliance. Thanks a lot.
And you are welcome to ask any questions. Also, I know there will be a QR code somewhere. I think Paul went through that. Like I said, there's a lot of information in these slides. When they publish them, it will give you some additional information. And also, like Paul said, on the Knowledge Center, we've got a lot of information. So there's your QR code. Go ahead.
I just wanted to confirm. So if we have an entity that we have contracts with, but then that entity sends students to our school, that could be considered a service that, as long as it's fair market, we do not have to report? Or?
No,
If it's a foreign source,
it's foreign
Yes,
source.
it's a foreign source.
then it's reportable.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Let me-
No, I certainly wouldn't have intended to say that it was not reportable. It's a services contract, right, basically?
Correct, yes. Okay.
I would follow up with err on the side of caution in reporting things. One of the university systems that we investigated in 2020 not only reports what's required, but they report every dime that they receive. And we joke about it being annoying. We think it's wonderful. It shows the great good faith efforts of that university. And so again, there's nothing wrong with erring on the side of caution. If in doubt, it shows your good faith. Thank you.
But don't keep reporting the same contract every 6 months, once you've reported it, unless you have a material change.
Hi. I'm over here to your right. I know, the lights are in your
Sorry.
eyes. No worries. This was wonderful information. However, to help us bring the voice back to our campuses, our universities, do you have this to be able to share with our executive leadership?
You mean the slides?
Slides, or being able to bring them with us the
Yes.
next
All
FSA
of-
conference?
All of this, my understanding is all of this will be public next week.
Okay.
But if you go to, and I don't have the site, but if you go to the Knowledge Center, there's a section 117, Foreign Gifts and Contracts section, and it gives you so much information. There are slides, we've done presentations, demonstrations, more information than you can probably, I shouldn't say this, probably get your leadership to pay attention to,
Okay.
but enough to give you a hook.
Okay,
To explain it to them.
thank you.
Hi, I have a few questions related to when a foreign entity acquires a Title IV institution. So at the purchase, should that be recorded one time as a contract with the value of whatever the purchase agreement price was?
Yes.
Okay.
That's the way it's done in the past, and also remember that just the foreign source ownership in the chain will have to be reported every 6 months.
Right, so then that was my next question. Is that an email after that, or is it through, because you said you don't want repeat
Currently, it's
reporting.
an email, and if you will email me at lisa.bureau@ed.gov, I can tell you the information that you need to submit.
Okay, and then the last question is, going forward, can there ever be a quote-unquote gift from a foreign owner to the school, or is that just putting in money for the operations? I'm thinking of, if, say the school needs to fund a letter of credit or an escrow in the future, and the owner gives them the money that they need to do that, the 100% collateral or going into the escrow account, is that a gift or is that just part of operations?
I would say that's going to be a reportable transaction.
And so reported as a gift one time through the portal next
Yep.
6 months. Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Lisa, I'm over here. I want to say, first of all, thank you very much for the new portal, and the fact that we can actually assign different roles is extremely helpful. So I want to give credit to you and you all for working that through. In the aid office, we found ourselves having to be the scribe for information we had no control or knowledge of, and we would literally sit on Zoom calls for an hour and type entries into the spreadsheet. And the fact that we now can have an analyst that is separate is extremely helpful. So again, thank you for that. Question for you about wholly owned subsidiaries of U.S. corporations, wholly owned foreign subsidiaries of U.S. corporations. The challenge with this is around addressing specifically, if they're, for example, located in Canada, but it's a U.S. corporation, but they're wholly owned, very often the formal address of the contract is actually a U.S.-based address, even though the contract is with the foreign-owned subsidiary. Advice on how to think about that from a foreign gifts perspective. Occasionally also the subsidiary has a sub-name, which is different than the U.S. corporation name. So should we think of them as completely separate and distinct from each other? How do we manage that sort of bridging between multinational corporations and their subsidiaries?
I mean, I hate to say this, but I mean, fundamentally, it's a due diligence question, right? And so I think when you look at the relationship, you're not only looking at the corporate structure, which is relevant, but you're also looking at how they interact, what the documents say. You're just going to have to make a good faith effort to kind of figure out, is this money coming from the foreign source? So and like I said, I think some of it will depend on how they actually interact together. If you're CCing someone from if you're CCing someone from the foreign subsidiary every time, then, it's probably a foreign source.
Yeah, and sometimes that is hard to dive into in the intricacies of the contract, but I get it. We will do the best we can to try to get there. So, thank you.
If I could add something on that, brings up an important subject. The Section 117 requires that the country of origin be reported. Over the last several years, there have been a lot of gifts and contracts that were coming from a particular country that are suddenly coming from Bermuda, Guernsey, and other known tax havens. And that may be appropriate and lawful for IRS purposes. And I can understand there may be a desire for your university and its 117 reporting to be consistent. We very much urge that you continue to report the actual country of origin as the statute requires, regardless of if there's a different, for tax purposes or whatever the other purposes may be, the country of origin being reported as the Bahamas or somewhere else. So I think it's a very important matter, and please be aware of it. And I also say thank you for your comments, sir. We continue to take in your thinking, your comments. How do we make this better? How do we improve what we're doing? So it's it's a fluid process for us in making what we're doing better. So don't hesitate to be in touch with suggestions, please, without profanity.
We've had a couple questions come in over through the QR code. One of them was a question related to a foreign contract with a housing entity for the study abroad programs, a contract that was signed in 2023. Do we need to report that now? If you determine that a contract or a gift that you received it and you didn't report it for whatever reason, yeah, you still have to report it now, and it has to be, reasonably valued as it would have been at the time you entered into it in 2023. and then you determine the amounts. But if it was reportable in 2023, the lapse of time doesn't get you out of the reporting obligation.
Oh, we don't need to report it every year, though.
You don't. Once you've reported the contract, unless you determine that there's been a material
I've been
change.
reporting ours every year, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. No, that just means you've really been trying hard to do it right. So we don't have a problem with that. It's something that we've, like I said, based on the new portal and kind of all the cues that are in the portal, it's a question that's just starting to come up, and we're realizing that there are other institutions that have been doing that. So, you know, the little reminders and in the portal, I think, have been helpful to us as well. Some of the other questions, there's been a few questions come in. If you don't get your question answered today, it may be because it is a little more complicated than the question presented. Please feel free to email us at foreignsourcereporting@ed.gov. The email addresses are on the Knowledge Center. If you don't write that down, they will, and we will do our best to give you the information that you need. And we do try to be as responsive as we can in those email boxes. So. Were there any other ones that we need to look at? Are there, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry, this is going to be an annoying question. So we only need to report this every 6 months, but the login only lasts 90 days. Is there any way to tie the login to our single sign-on with FSA portal?
So unfortunately, the 90-day kick-out requirement is actually the source of a different federal law, FSMA. You're not the only ones that this provides an issue for. This is a cross-governmental issue.
Sorry.
Requires Congress. Can't do it, sorry.
Now, I will say this. The reporting deadlines are statutory. The portal doesn't close, right? So, you know, I know, you know, institutions have systems and they gear them around those dates, but sorry. We asked that as a, you know, kind of practitioner kind of person. I was like, well, can't you just fix that? And people who are smarter than me and understand technology said, no. Anyone else? Again, thank you all for being here. I know it's late. Go have lunch.
Thank you.